In this video, we will demonstrate entering payments in UAN. We'll enter several examples, including electronic vouchers and warrants. Technically, there are three types of payments in UAN, but really only two types are common: warrants and electronic payments. The manual payment type is extremely rare, and you may never use it. So what exactly do we mean by these? If you are brand new to government, warrants are simply another name for checks. So when you add a warrant, you are preparing to print a check. In UEN, you can only print warrants from the primary checking account. Any checks written from secondary checking accounts need to be handled differently, but that is a subject for another video. For now, just remember that UEN will print warrants from one checkbook. Manual payments are used in UEN to enter information after the fact from handwritten warrants. Only use these in very unusual circumstances. A few rare examples: you may use manual payments as part of a detail conversion from another accounting system to UEN when you're joining UEN. So chances are, if you're watching this video, that's already a done deal, and so this just simply doesn't apply. It's a one-time thing. The other example that happens occasionally is an extended electric outage in your region might cause you to need to handwrite some checks, although even this should be very rare. This has happened with Ohio governments. We had some ice storms several years ago, and a lot of people lost power for a week, couple weeks. You may find yourself in that situation and have bills that come due, and you may have to handwrite those checks so that you don't get a late penalty. Well, even if you have that, you'll still need to have a purchase order in place if you're going to handwrite a check. But after the power comes back on, you'll need to enter the information back into UEN from your handwritten checks in the same check order number in which they were written. So this is very tedious, and you want to avoid this as much as possible. There are fiscal officers who have been on UEN for decades, and they've gone that entire time without ever having to write and enter in a manual check into UEN. Electronic payments are a lot more common. You use an electronic payment to print vouchers of payments not involving a primary checking account warrant. In other words, money has been taken out of your account electronically in some way, or you are recording a payment for an account other than your primary checking. Online payments, phone-in payments, getting to be far less common now. Automatic withdrawals, such as bank service fees, other types of automatic withdrawals as well. And then what's not so common, payments in UEN for warrants written from secondary checkbooks. In addition, you would do a checking transfer with one of these electronics. This last one is less common, so we won't get into a full explanation today, but posting electronic payment is part of that process. For our demonstrations, we'll focus on online payments and automatic withdrawals after we do several examples of warrant payments. Typically, you pay bills at regularly scheduled meetings. Are there situations where you are authorized to pay some bills in between regularly scheduled board meetings? Well, follow your entity's authorized payment procedures as legislated. You need to make sure you understand when you're permitted to pay bills in between meetings. For example, maybe you're authorized for this for some reoccurring online payments, or on occasion where you must mail a warrant to avoid late penalties. Understand specifically when permissions are granted and when they are not, so you don't exceed your authority. You also need to make sure you understand when a bill arrives in your office, where is it going to be paid from? What purchase order or blanket certificate will you use for this bill? Review your open purchase orders and reports to see the payment history, such as the payment register detail. We'll look at that briefly in a few moments. Make notes for each invoice as it arrives. So when the time comes to prepare for your meeting, you've done the research ahead of time and you'll be ready to enter payments in UEN. Well, if you've watched the other videos in this series, You know by now there's no need to panic. Even though UN support cannot assist you with this question, the fact is if you follow the steps to review your purchase orders, you have probably come to some conclusions about what account codes to use for your recurring bills. For other bills, you can start with reports if you have good audits, review the uniform accounts, and if all else fails, click Contact Us to find the phone number of your regional auditor or an auditor at local government services. Let's roll on into our UN software demonstrations. If you're a new fiscal officer, the first thing to do is get an idea of your payment history to understand what account code you should use on different types of payments. As mentioned, this is only helpful if you have good audits and are following someone who was good at their job. So we're going to go to Accounting, Reports and Statements, Payment Reports. The first one that comes up is Payment Listing, and that's only going to give you one line per payment. So we'll click the menu and choose Payment Register Detail. As the name implies, this is going to show you all the detail for every accounting and payroll payment in the application. I recommend selecting the year date range to select the entire year-to-date set of transactions. We can also click the Filters tab if you want to narrow down the list. For example, if you know the payments you're investigating don't have anything to do with payroll and they are warrants, then we can go to the filters and change it from all to just accounting to exclude payroll and change the form type to just warrant so we exclude all of our electronic payments from the list. So if I want to see how garbage bills are paid, well, I can do what we've done in a lot of our videos already. I can click on the column headings to sort alphabetically. In this case, I'm going to choose the payee to sort by vendor. And my vendor is Garbage Services. Let's pay my garbage bill too. So I can check mark. Looks like we've just had 3 payments this year. So I can check mark all 3 of those. So with this report, I can see how the payments are split up among several account codes in this case. I may even want to pull the check number along with the original invoice and take a look at that bill. This will shed some light for me on why the fiscal officer divided out the bill this way. In some cases, you may find that different bills paid at different months might be divided differently, and having a look at that invoice alongside with the payment register detail will shed some light on the logic of why the fiscal officer might have done that. So I think you're really going to like this report to get a feel for your real payment at your entity. This is a great report. Again, I highly recommend it. No use looking at the Buckeye Township examples. Yours will be most helpful to you. I want to point out that you can also, in some cases, you're going to have bills that only come in once or twice a year that you pay. So you can always look at a payment history going back several years and find the 1 or 2 payments. It's easy enough to sort by vendor and scroll through and find the vendors that you need. Enough said about that. We'll move on to transactions. To add payments in UEN, we go to Accounting, Transactions, and Payments. If we have any payments that are a work in progress, they will be in our batch list. I'll click Add to see our 3 types of payments. We'll start with warrant payments in our demonstrations and then finish up with electronic payments. We will not demonstrate manual payments since these are so rare. If you think you need to post a manual payment, please contact UN support to discuss it and we can get you started if needed. I will select Warrant. Our first example today will be paying a utility bill. Most local governments will receive multiple utility bills which represent various buildings, streetlights, and other locations throughout your government. So for larger entities, you may have several different electric, gas, or water expenses that are incurred for different facilities, and you're receiving a separate bill for each. It's common to allocate the expenses to the program code that incurred the expense. It can be hard to keep track of all this. It's not like the invoices show up in the mail all the same day. They trickle in throughout the month. So it helps to really be organized so that you are ready to pay the bills with the right codes when they come in at that time. The easiest way to do this is to create a spreadsheet that will allow you to combine all the bills for each utility type and to determine the expenditure allocation of the current month's bills. Hopefully, you inherited a good system from the fiscal officer you took over for, but if not, you can consider the example that I'm about to show you of how we handle Buckeye Township's electric bill. Here we have a breakdown of our electric bills that our township has received by our meeting date. Of course, sometimes you won't get all the bills by your meeting date, but you should organize them on your spreadsheet as they come in. Some of you have 2 meetings per month, so you'll pay some locations at the first meeting, and as they trickle in, you'll pay the rest at the second meeting. Don't let them pile up to do all of this right before your meeting. As the bills come in, you can start filling out your spreadsheet to be organized like this. The first thing you may have to do when you get the bill is to figure out which bill goes with each location. The description on the invoice may not reveal much about the service location. Once you figure that out, you can plug the amount into your spreadsheet template. For example, at Buckeye, we received all invoices applicable for the road department, including the traffic signal, security light, and garage. But so far, we only have been billed for the month for 2 of the 4 cemeteries. This is just what we have received by the meeting date. So we have, as the month progresses, kept a running total for each department and a grand total for the electric bill. If you are somewhat savvy with Excel formulas, that can make it very easy for you to just enter the amount and the spreadsheet will total it up for you. Of course, your entity may have simpler or more extensive breakdowns depending on the functions of your government. You probably should include appropriation account codes on the cheat sheet, not just department. If you're new, that's probably something you should do as you get familiar with those. We start by choosing the vendor or start typing. Our electric company is Sparkly Electric. Then pick the vendor from the list. And then we're going to choose the location. When the location is blank, it means you either have no location or more than 1 location. So just click the menu and you can see, in this case, we have 3 locations. If we were using windowed envelopes to mail our payments, this would be especially important to get the right payment. So we need to choose one of these 3 payments wherever this is going to be mailed to. Now we should select the post date. In training land, it's April 5th, and I'm going to get ready for my meeting on April 7th. The post date should be the meeting date, the date that the warrants will be signed and distributed. Never date them too early. UAN permits you to forward date payments so that you can prepare them and print them ahead of time with the correct date. When we finish, we'll click the Post and Print button today in Training Land, April 5th, but the date on the check will be the post date that we enter here, which is 2 days from now in Training Land, April 7th. In fact, UAN permits you to date payments up to 30 days in advance. Of course, that would be extremely unusual, but printing checks a few days before is very common, and there is no need to wait until a meeting day to prepare. The bottom 2 sections of the form include the detail and distribution. The detail area describes what you are purchasing and how much it costs. The distribution area lists the account codes you'll be charging for that expense. At this point, you have a choice to make. You can manually fill out the form using the data entry lines and pick lists, or you can import the information from a purchase order you have opened for this type of expense. On this payment, we'll use several account codes from our one regular purchase order, so using the import button will just make the job much easier. I'll click Import Purchase Order. If you blinked, you may not have caught that UAN opened a new screen in front of the Add Payment form. I'll drag it out of the way so you can see. On the Import Purchase form, start by narrowing down the type. You will, of course, have your own printed copies of purchase orders and blanket certificates that you can look at for this vendor. For Buckeye Township, we know that this is something we'll use a purchase order regular that we already have open. So I'll select PO regular. In most cases, you're going to skip the fund menu. That is something that we added to this form for very rare circumstances. Most of the time, it's not helpful. So I'll skip to the number list. and this will show me a list of all of the purchase order regulars that are open for this particular vendor. Here at Buckeye, you can see that we have 2 purchase orders for Sparkly, one issued recently and one way back in January. At the beginning of the year, after we put in our temporary appropriations, we issued purchase orders, including one for our electric bill, based on those appropriations. We didn't use all of it, and it doesn't have an expiration date, and so there's no need to close it yet. We can use it for payments until the unspent balance is 0 for each account code. Then we can close it and spend off the second purchase order for bills that come in the rest of the year. Of course, then, I'll pick the first one here for our payment. It fills in the detail section with the original amount of the purchase order, and the distribution shows the current unspent balance for each of the account codes. To be clear, when we click Import, all that UAN will do is copy the information we select into the payment, and in there we can edit anything that we need to change. So you don't change it in this form itself, you select what you want to copy over to the payment. Now our bill is for $575, so we might decide not to select the detail row because we clearly don't need $4,750, and it may be just as easy to type that in to the row when we get to the payment. It's just a matter of preference. I prefer to edit, so I'll mark mine. In the distribution, you only need to select the account codes necessary for the particular payment. Again, I could only select some of these if that's all I needed for this particular payment. It just happens that we need to use all of them for this payment, so I will select all. Also, if it makes sense for your situation, then you can choose to copy the PO purpose from the purchase order into the payment purpose field if you'd like that to print on certain payment reports. Now I'll click on Import to copy that information into our payment. And there it is. Make sure to edit the details section before your distribution of the account codes. You should always do that. So I'm going to go to unit price, and I can just type over the number that copied into that. Remember, our payment is $575.92. When I click on tab, it recalculates the extended price. And you'll notice my undistributed amount is way off. It's a negative. Remember, the import copied the purchase order's unspent balance of each account code into the payment. We'll need to edit each of those account codes as well. I'll expand this so you can see the full list. Notice it sorts our list by the highest to lowest unspent balance, but since I'm using my spreadsheet, it will be easy to enter these into account code order, so I'll click the account code to sort it by those. Well, I should have said account code column heading, and that resorted them highest to lowest or lowest to highest, depending on how many times you click it. All right, so for the first account code, I'm going to type over the amount that defaulted from the copied purchase order and put in just the amount I need for the bill. So that is $62.02 from my spreadsheet. Press enter, and that'll bring me to next account code for my road, which I'm charging to my gas tax fund in our case, which is a total of $89.98. For our cemetery fund, we've got 2 of the invoices for the locations. The other 2 we haven't received to date, so I just put in that total of $78.44. Then for park, $37.50. And for our firehouse, it's $303.98. Oh, it looks like I made a mistake. See here with my general fund and our town hall, that should have been $66.02, and I entered $62.02. You can see under undistributed that the amount of my payment is not distributed to all of those account codes. Just to show you what that would look like if I didn't catch that mistake, click on Save, and you see I get a red dot. It's a warning, and it doesn't allow me to save it because the form's not properly filled out. If I hover over that red dot, it says undistributed amount must equal 0. In other words, I've got to distribute all of my payment to different account codes in my budget. So I can correct that. That little red dot's not going to go away until after I save it again, but I'll go ahead and put that in 6602, press enter. Oops, I did it again. 66.02, watch what I'm doing. And now it's undistributed is now 0, and I could save this. Now let me explain one more thing before I save this payment. It's still early in the year, and we will be able to use this first purchase order for a few more payments, the one that I've copied into this payment. Eventually, it's likely that we'll get to a point where some of the account codes will be spent to 0 while others will continue to have an unspent balance. Very likely. When that happens, I can use the new purchase order with the same payment as the old one. So it's easy. After I distribute whatever I can with the first purchase order, I can either pick the new PO from the data entry line at the bottom and then enter that and add whatever accounts I need line by line, or I can use the import purchase order button again and select only the accounts I need to import for the difference. Either way works. The point is you can use more than one purchase order for a payment, and you can spend out those purchase orders that haven't expired. They're still legitimate. All right, so we're ready to save this. I'm just going to click Remember Dates until form closes and click Save. Our next payment example is for an auto fuel bill. Usually, local governments receive one fuel bill and the fiscal officer has to use labeled receipts to identify the correct department allocation. It is common to allocate expenses to the program code that incurred the expense. In other words, during the month, all the employees that get fuel turn in those little sales slips. Hopefully, they are in the practice of writing either their department on the slip, or if their entity charges fuel to BCs, they might write the blanket certificate number on the slip. Either way, this is another example of when the fiscal officer can use a spreadsheet to stay organized and avoid a pile of unnecessary work right before their meeting. As they turn in their slips as you go throughout the month, use another cheat sheet like the one I have here to keep a running total of each purchase separated by department. When the bill comes in, you should compare the details on the invoice to see what fuel sales apply to that bill. It may be that some of the sales slips you receive won't show up as due until you receive next month's invoice. So you would back out those sales that were not included in the current bill, and your calculated total should match the invoice total. If not, you may find you're missing some sales slips, which of course you would only know by looking at the invoice details compared to your list. Well, then you'd need to resolve that. So contact department heads. Maybe someone left one of these slips in a vehicle or at a desk somewhere. You need to get those so that you have the documentation and know which account codes to charge on your payment. After that, you can finalize this table and move forward with the payment. As always, start by picking the vendor name, typing it in. For us, that's the Corner Gas Mart. It filled in my post date because I remember dates until form closes. So there it is. It's going to be our meeting date. And then I'll fill in the distribution. Quantity of 1. If I press the tab key, it moves me over to unit name. For month. Fuel for a description. And it's 778 total. 84. Tab over. Now this time I'm going to use the invoice number. I have that, so I'll type that in. And press enter to bring that up to our detail list. Now I could have used the import button, but since I'll be using blanket certificates on this payments, it's kind of a waste of time. Remember, blanket certificates can only have one account code each and usually not a description. You don't have to put a description, so usually we don't. So it'll be easy enough to pick them from our distribution list. First, I'll choose BC from the type list down here. The next field will list all of my open BCs that don't have a specific vendor specified, which is most of them in our case. I know my township BC numbers, and you may know yours, so in my case, I can just type them in. Otherwise, you'll need to browse by account code on this list if you don't have your BCs handy, but you know what account code you use. BC number 16 is the first one I want to pick. So I just look at my spreadsheet and you can see how easy it is for me. Since I've kept this up to date, as the slips came in throughout the month, I've got my grand total for that fund, 2021, gas tax, and I can just type in the amount. I'll pick BC again, and then I know it's BC 20, which is for the fire fund at 346.42. And lastly, for Park BC 19, notice it fills in exactly the amount I need on the last one because that's all that is left to distribute for the payment. You can see again, there's enough on BC 19 for this account code to cover that final amount. So my undistributed amount is 0 now. As you can see, you can use multiple blanket certificates on one payment. Even though blanket certificates are limited to one account code in a single BC, look at my distribution list. All BCs I picked are using account codes with the operating supplies object code, but each is out of a separate fund and program. All right, I'm ready to save and move on to our next example. In our next example, we received an invoice from our attorneys, Lyon, Cheatham, and Billum. There's a name you can trust. At least our board members think so. I'll try to keep that to a minimum. Well, as usual, we'll start by typing in the vendor name. And of course, it remembered our post date. Remember dates until form closes. That's good for our meeting. Now, in filling this out, it helps to be really familiar with your purchase order so you know whether it'll be easier to import using the import button and copy it over or use the data entry lines. Sometimes a combination of both works out best. I'll start by typing this in the quantity. Put in a good description, legal fees. Oh, we haven't really talked about the invoice number field yet. As you can see, it's a white field, it's optional, but it can be very useful. UAN will keep track of the number you enter and give you a warning message if you try to make a second payment using the exact same number, as long as you type it in exactly the same. It's also nice because you can click on the payment history and you can see what invoices have been paid from this vendor. For the invoice number on this payment history is blank because our previous fiscal officer chose not to use this optional feature, but we're going to change that practice today because it makes sense for our township. Now that the details are finished, I'll show you an example of copying just a portion of the purchase order or of a purchase order into my payment. First, I'll narrow it down by purchase order regular type and then select the number. We can see again, just like we had with Sparkly Electric, that at Buckeye, I have an older PO and a newer one for this vendor. Now, with the electric bill, I knew I could use the older purchase order because the purchase orders were for the same purpose and use the same account codes. This is where it helps to know your purchase orders so that you don't have to hunt and peck as much. In this example, I want to use the new purchase order because I know that the older one doesn't have the account code that I need for this payment. So I'll select the newer one. I don't want to copy over the detail in this case because I already did that. I entered it in the payment. I knew I wanted a description that was different than what's on the purchase order, and that's why I manually entered it on the payment, so I can just skip to the distribution section. So in the distribution, here we have to decide which account code to use or whether to select both and distribute the bill to both of them. I looked at my invoice and I see that this is for preparation of legislation, and in our particular township, just an example, we only use the administration program code, that's the 110, for this type of expense. So I'll mark that and leave the other one alone. Notice it displays the estimated unspent balance, and when I click on import, it's just going to copy that one thing into my payment, that amount, at $8,000 in this case. Of course, that's way too much, so I can just type over what I need for this bill, which is only $100. And now my distribution is fully distributed. And of course, once again, I could have used the data entry line instead of the import button. It's just a matter of preference, whatever you like. I'll click save and we'll be done with that one. This example is an invoice from the gravel pit. We bought salt from them. I'm going to show you this example so you can see what it looks like to add a PO regular using the data entry line instead of the import button. Knowing your purchase orders will inform your decision on this. At Buckeye, here's a printout of the purchase order I intend to use. It only has one account code, so it's easy to pick it from a list. It has a fairly simple description. I'd like to add more details for this particular payment, so filling out the form manually will be just as easy as if I had imported. I'll pick the vendor from our list and then fill out the detail first. Invoice number. Now for the distribution. Notice when I pick the type that now PO is a type on the list this time. This is the first one we filled out manually where we're using a purchase order regular. And so you can see that that's an option because we have some open. Rather, we have some open for the gravel pit vendor. In fact, when I pick the PO number, I see that I have two open for the gravel pit, and I know I want to use the first one. You can see that on the list. It's got an unspent balance, notice, of $525 on that particular PO. So I'll select that. Notice that it's filled in the entire amount of my payment, the $325 from the detail. It did that because my unspent balance was more than enough to cover the bill, and the software will assume that I want to charge all of it to that account code. That wasn't what we wanted to do when we filled out the electric bill and the fuel payments, because we spread it out over several account codes. Furthermore, if I had imported, it would have copied the $525 into the payment, and I would need to replace that and enter in the $325. So you can see with simple payments like this, manually picking the purchase order is handy and it saves us more time. So it's not a bad option. And since this is our last warrant payment that we're going to do, I'll go ahead and close the form. Now I have all of my sample warrant payments ready for the next board meeting. Obviously, most of you will have a much longer list of payments to prepare. Don't forget, this is a batch list, a work in progress list that you can review and edit as much as needed before you post the checks. Select all and click edit. And you can see the vendor is no longer available for all of the fields. The other fields are still editable. So if you added these before your first cup of coffee, you might want to come back later after a short break to take a final look before you post them. You might catch a typo. You want to make sure your post dates are right or correct any account code errors. You don't necessarily need to delete the entire payment if it's just a matter of changing an account code. You could click the little X in the corner to delete that row or type in a different amount. And sure, you can delete an entire payment if it's just easy in some cases to just start over. So here you can navigate to different payments and review and edit if needed be. I'll go ahead and close. Once you're ready to start, you can just select all the payments in the batch list or just a portion of the payments, maybe one or two at a time. If you're a brand new fiscal officer, please start by posting just one payment by itself until you feel confident. And even then, it's a good practice to limit the number of warrants you're posting at one time, just in case you have a printer problem. No one wants to post a huge batch only to find out that the checks were damaged by the printer, because printers do jam, even good ones. There's a reason we hate these things, right? I'll start by selecting just one warrant. And I'm like a new fiscal officer. Good idea. And I'll click on Post Print at the bottom. I'll get a confirmation that I'm posting, in this case, just one selected item. According to what you posted last time, this should be the next check number for printing this payment. If the next warrant number listed does not correspond to the real warrant number, then you shouldn't click OK yet to print. For example, if you accidentally left a stack of checks in your printer and printed a report onto them, which actually is a pretty common mistake, then the check is damaged and this is not your next check number. Whatever caused the unused checks to get damaged, you will need to skip over them in UAN so that UAN will properly record the check numbers that the software is truly printing the payment on. So here at Buckeye Township, old bumbling Bob spilled coffee on the check number 3572 and it's ruined. In the user selected field then, I'll type over and type in 3573, and you can see that it's telling me that the next check number, the next warrant will be skipped. So I'll click OK. Now it's going to warn us. If you continue, one warrant number will be skipped and marked as voided. Make sure you typed in the right check number to skip and you're not voiding too many checks. It shows you here. If it looks correct to you, and in our case it does, then that's what we want. That check cannot be used for payment. It should be voided. It should be hand voided as well. OK to continue. You'll get a printer message that tells you right on the screen the range of warrants it's about to print. Load 3573 through 3573, so one check. Load the actual checks in the printer this way. Face down. The top of the check should be facing towards you. If you are printing more than one check, put the lowest check number at the top of the stack so it prints first. We got that done, so we'll click Print. Of course, take it out, make sure everything printed as expected, and you didn't have it upside down or backwards. Click Yes, it printed successfully. Once you're comfortable printing one warrant at a time, we suggest printing batches of 5 or 10 checks at a time if you're a small entity. Even for larger entities with a huge volume of checks to print each month, we still recommend printing maybe 10 checks in each print job. If it's a really high volume, okay, maybe 20 checks at the most. Even the best printers out there are going to jam sometimes. If you print 50 checks or more and it jams in the middle, you may need to void most of those checks. It's just not worth it to do that. I'd say it's worth being cautious and printing lower numbers like I suggested. So for our little sample, I'll select all and post and print. Posting 3 selected items. Our checks are back in sequence now, so I can just click OK. And it gives me the check range of 3 checks, 74 through 76. And I should say, I recommend you only load the range of checks it lists on the print screen and no more. That way you don't make the most common mistake of accidentally printing a report on your checks. And then you've ruined maybe several or all of them. So did they print successfully in our little virtual world? We say yes. All those examples of payments, and we still haven't done any of electronic payments yet. Not to worry, the good news is the steps for electronic payments are exactly the same except for a couple of small things you have to do, and it'll print a voucher instead of to warrant paper. In order for me to show you though, we'll need to step on the Training Land time machine, so come, join me in the future in Training Land. All right, in Training Land, we've arrived on calendar day, May 2nd, and our fiscal officer is working on a couple of things. We've started on our April bank reconciliation, and you can see it's in batch, but we'll get to that in a moment. Here under Accounting Transactions Payments, you can see that our fiscal officer has added an electronic payment, but did not have time to complete it before leaving the day yesterday. So I just have one quick edit to make before we post. I'll mark it and click on Edit to open the edit form. At Buckeye Township, our employees pay a small portion of their insurance premium as a payroll withholding once a month through the UAN payroll software, and that has already been withheld on their last paycheck. And that will post as a separate electronic payment using the UAN payroll software as well. But that's not the subject of our video today, so we won't get into all the details of those steps. This payment is the amount Buckeye Township is paying on the employee's behalf as a benefit, the employer's share. The only thing left for me to do in this payment is to adjust the date. Today's training land date is May 2nd, and that's what we have it set on. We will make the online payment today, but our effective date on the online website will be May 4th because that's when it's due, and we know it takes a little time on their system to process. This is in between meetings for us, so remember, you need to know your permissions and if you have legal authority for certain payments in between meetings. Follow your entity's authorized legislative payment procedures. You need to understand specifically the permissions granted and when they are not so that you don't exceed your authority. Okay, so I'm going to change it to the 4th and save and close the batch. Now we can select it to post and print this voucher. It's one selected item, and it says printing one accounting electronic payment. Make sure you load plain paper, so not warrant paper this time. We don't want to waste a check. We'll print the voucher to plain paper. And it looks like that printed successfully, no problem. And I just want to emphasize to our newer fiscal officers, UEN does not actually transmit the money to the insurance company. That's something that you'll do online. So what I would do here was print this voucher, then immediately go online and schedule the payment with whatever system I would do that. It's something outside of the UEN software. All I'm doing here is recording the record that that's going to be done. And we would normally want to do that, one right after the other. Finally, we'll wrap things up with an example of an automatic withdrawal. And we'll do that by looking at our bank statement and our bank reconciliation that's work in progress right now. Now remember, to get to your bank rec, you normally go to Accounting Transactions, Bank Reconciliation, but I have the tab open, so I can just click right on it. And I see my batch bank rec, so I'll select that and choose Edit and Post. Well, we've made a lot of progress on our bank reconciliation. We've got our statement balances in and a lot of our transactions selected. But as I've gone through, I've noticed that we're missing a transaction. We ordered some deposit slips earlier in the month, and I see now on our bank rec, not our bank rec, but our bank statement, that the fee was automatically withdrawn on April 27th. We still need to record that in UAN. To enter it, we need to first close the bank reconciliation. You don't have to delete the bank rec or stop it, just close it off the screen. And then we can go to Payments, Accounting Transaction Payments, or since I have it still open, I'll click on the Payments tab. And to add the record, I click on Add and choose Electronic. That'll open the Add Payment form with Electronic labeled on the right. And of course, I pick my vendor, and this will be the bank name, First Buckeye Bank. We'll pick the post date. We're going to backdate it to April 27th because that's exactly when it was withdrawn from our bank account. Remember, our calendar date in Training Land now is May 2nd, but since this happened in April, we can backdate it so that it will appear in the correct month. Since we have a blanket certificate we can use, I'll fill out the form manually. As I said, we have a BC open that we can use. You might have a purchase order regular. It doesn't matter. I mean, this is just an example, of course. The important thing is it must be certified before the commitment to purchase. If you have a fee like this that is automatically withdrawn and you didn't have any type of purchase order open, you would need to post a then and now purchase order to be upfront with your auditors about that mistake. Save and close, and then post and print. Printing one electronic paper, make sure you take any warrant papers out if you had them. And yes, it printed successfully. Don't forget to report all of your UEN training for Fiscal Integrity Act credit. Following the auditor state's guidelines and deadlines on the training